Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
This is the RPM podcast.
And welcome again to another post-race discussion. This time, the first ever Tuscan Grand Prix, and we see Ferrari's 1,000th Grand Prix. There's a lot of firsts and a 1,000th to deal with in this episode. Before we get to all of that race discussion, because there's quite a bit to talk about, we're going to go to our view from the stands, which, if you're not aware, is our questions and comments from you, the listeners. And the first one today is from Dave Doherty, who's got back in touch again on Twitter. And he asks, what are our thoughts on having fans back in F1 in Mugello? Obviously in relation to the COVID situation, finally seeing some fans back in the stands.
Okay, so I'm gonna start on this. I didn't realize there was any fans until partway through the race, and I think it's great. I think it's a good start. There was about 2,500, between 2,500 and 3,000. Both those numbers were quoted during the race and during the build-up, so not quite sure which one it was, but between those, I imagine. I should imagine, like the UK, they turned up in their little bubbles and sat within their little areas. But I tell you what was good. Anyway. Yeah, I hope so. But what was good, and I know I'm cutting towards the end of the race, but just seeing a little bit of interaction from the drivers towards the fans. I was like, you know what? I miss this. As much as it gets a bit cliche and it gets a bit repetitive sometimes, I was like, you know what? We've got the best fans here.
We got the best fans.
But it was good. It was really good, and it was well executed. So hopefully tracks can start to include fans going forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same about the finish of the race. Yeah, it's always been a bit eerie, kind of oddly silent at the end of the races, especially with Monza, where they were there and it felt so echoey.
Oh, man.
I mean, it was nice that you could hear kind of closer to what was going on to the action. You can kind of hear what people are saying a bit easier because obviously there's not much screaming of fans and all the rest of it. But yeah, I've missed it. I've missed that interaction. So nice to have them back. Hopefully it was all done safely and, it's can be done responsibly and it can come back to F1.
It was nice to hear a cheer when the three pulled up at the end. And it was nice that was a raw reaction. Like that was actually the fans. There's none of this televised stuff, which we haven't seen in a couple of races, which I'm very glad about. But yeah, getting that raw reaction from the fans was fantastic. And just hearing it on the starting grid, you could hear them on the mics, which is, amazing. And I echo what you said about Monza. Not having them last week was strange because the Tifosi are some of the best fans. Like I don't care who you support or what country you're from. No one does fans like the Tifosi. That was, and it was just weird seeing 2019 compared to 2020.
Yeah, we're used to quite a big, impressive sight at the Monza podium, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks very much for your question there, Dave, and keep them coming on Twitter at RacePerMinute.
Yep, thank you very much. So moving on to the race discussion, we'll start with any pre-race comments. I really took a keen interest in FP1 and FP2 actually, because F1 cars haven't been around this track in a very long time, and I wanted to kind of understand the characteristics of the track. What corners would catch people out? What corners would be flat out? What corners wouldn't be? What the DRS straight was like? How effective would it be? Because we get very used to visiting the same tracks over and over again, so you can almost predict the strategy, who starts where, and where they're going to end up. But this was almost like the first year I was watching F1 again. I was like, oh, it's a brand new track. I haven't raced in this track on any game before. So I was like, I've got to learn the track myself. What corners do I think are really good? What ones would I really enjoy driving? And so I love free practice and pre-practice too. I didn't manage to watch number 3 or qualifying, but from what I saw, cars were pushing quite early on. We had a couple of offs, a couple of spins. I know Latifi had a spin in free practice one. I know it's not unusual. But a couple more people were exploring the track limits to try and get that ultimate lap time.
It's an experience we've kind of been robbed of as well a little bit this year because we haven't had Zandvoort, we haven't had Hanoi. We were going to get new tracks that we didn't have. We don't have a load of data or, like you say, predictable strategies to go forward. We get this brand new experience. So that's exciting already. It's not one we've driven on the game, for example.
I'm so disappointed, and I know we can't blame Codemasters or criticize their development, but how good would it be to have the Turkish Grand Prix back on the game, and Mugello? That track actually looks amazing to drive. I get a little bit excited about talking about it because it does look like it's an old school track. It's very fast flowing. It's not very forgiving at all. The drivers were put through their paces today, and you could see it at the end of the race, or in between red flag sessions. You could see that they were physically and almost mentally exhausted. And I thought, this looks like a track which would be really well received on a video game. Unfortunately, we won't get that. But Codemasters, if you're listening,
race control box as well.
Yes, yeah, it looks so just open, which is what it was. Nowadays they're covered in reinforced plastic, so they're quite high up, covered in reinforced plastic, quite large. This was a tiny little box, little metal shell, just hanging over the pitch straight ever so slightly, just poking its head there. And I was like, you know what? These are the tracks I want to keep on going back to. I really hope, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I hope that this year has taught us, if it's taught us anything, then actually let's introduce old school tracks. Let's go back to these places. Let's not have the same 22 tracks every single year. Let's switch them out, make it a little bit more different, because we'll have races like we have done this year already. And
Shane, did you know that there are some tracks around the world that have not been designed by Herman Tilke? Turns out there are other tracks around the world that we can use. We don't have to race on Tilkedromes all the time.
Nice.
I mean, some of the Tilkedromes are good, don't get me wrong, but
yeah,
it's definitely become a certain style of track that has become more common as time has gone on, and we've lost a bit of that old school. I believe I heard Roman Grosjean refer to it once as the sex appeal.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to get too bogged down with the details, but it does look like a fantastic track to drive. It's so fast flowing.
Let's also talk a little bit about in relation to the track itself, Mugello. We have this Ferrari 1000 Grand Prix event.
Yes.
We had Mick Schumacher in his father's championship-winning F2004. That was awesome.
What a sight. What a sight, and equally, what a sound. That car sings beautifully, the V10. Oh, it doesn't get any better than that.
To its sound with accompanied by all the Sky presenters talking over it as well.
Yes. I did manage to find on the depths of Reddit a non-commentated on board, and it just sounds incredible. But what a moment for the sport. It was just magical. Absolutely magical.
Yep. We had a red safety car, red Mercedes.
We had red flags, red everything, just apart from two red cars.
Yeah, well, there were two red cars. Both of them finished. Not a lot of teams could say that today.
They did. They were one of the very few teams who had two cars left at the end of the race, which is a good step up for Ferrari.
Even the crane trucks were red, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yeah, it was nice seeing a red safety car. It was a bit different, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But go back.
That was red fire extinguishers coming out as well.
Oh, blimey. Red fire, everything. It was just, what a race. Moving on to qualifying. I didn't watch it. So did anything stand out for you? I've got the results here.
I couldn't help be impressed with Charles Leclerc, obviously getting it into fifth.
Yes, and Albon as well, up in fourth, just behind his teammate. Half a second off his teammate, but behind his teammate.
Verstappen finally got his wingman.
Yes, and it played out in the race, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a little bit underwhelming perhaps for McLaren, who I think probably wanted to do better, but Lando in 11th, got his choice of tyres, so that probably helped in some ways. That
was his first race this year where he didn't qualify in the top 10.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So, unlucky
It
Lando.
shows how consistent he's been.
He's been very good this year, can't fault him at all.
And Nicholas Latifi, not qualifying last.
Blimey, I didn't even notice that. And only 10th behind Russell. Now, what I did notice about Russell, and I thought this was fantastic, he said he fully planted it on one of the corners. It hasn't been flat out the whole weekend for the Williams, but he thought, you know what? I'm going to throw caution to the wind. I'm going to plant it the whole way through. And he went off onto the gravel, kept his foot completely planted and got it back on the track. And I thought, you know what? That guy's got some balls. He went for it. It didn't pay off. That was a fast lap for him, but he had a little bit more potential. Look how close it was. It was only 2/10 off Q2, to be fair. He wasn't far off at all.
But yeah, pretty decent qualifying overall. And yeah, but Charles Leclerc, the most impressive result for me, getting that to Ferrari into fifth.
Absolutely.
He wasn't to stay there though, unfortunately.
Oh, it was tragic. It was just comical, some would say. The painstakingly slow car in the grid was being overtaken every single lap. It was another car overtaken until he decided to box for an alternative strategy. And they went on a couple of alternative strategies at Ferrari. Again, mixing it up mid-race. Not quite sure what they're doing. Not sure they know what they're doing, or Charles. But nevertheless, they boxed a couple of times. I think one more than everyone else.
So we come to lights out then. And you already mentioned that there were some engineers, including some Honda engineers, working on Verstappen's car.
Yes, a little bit worrying. But apparently it was a software issue, apparently, which I always find hilarious when I see people with the bodywork off, cooling gas coming out of the radiators, and it's a software engineer. I'm like, well, if it's a software engineer, plug in a laptop. I don't understand, obviously the ins and outs of a Formula One car.
They didn't find out until later, I guess.
Clearly they didn't. And apparently it was a lot more severe than what they were expecting. But I think for the starting grid, that was the only thing before the actual lights out which went wrong.
Yeah, well, as the lights went out themselves, it was Verstappen was a bit hard done by on this because he did have a very good start.
He had a very good start.
We immediately saw his rear lights flash, which, then he just went backwards. Had this big power loss. But I think he himself acknowledged that, he would have been probably out anyway because of the engine issue.
Yeah, he was unfortunately tangled up in a bunch of cars where he probably shouldn't have been racing.
I thought he generally was pretty good. I think he kind of was pretty cautious going through there.
Oh, absolutely, undoubtedly. But he shouldn't have been in that position, unfortunately. If that car was performing at its spec, he would have been clear of that incident straight away.
He would have been second.
Yeah. Oh, blimey.
He would have been second. So.
Absolutely.
But then it became Albon's race for Red Bull. It was down to him.
Yeah.
Hamilton obviously didn't do so well at the start, and Bottas,
bit of a shock, wasn't it?
Pulled away.
I got a little bit excited because Hamilton's been so strong this year off the line. That was his. He has struggled with that over the last couple of years, especially when it went to full control for the driver or uncoached, and I put that in brackets because there's still an element of coaching going on. But Bottas got a great start, and Hamilton had nothing to defend himself with. So turn one, Bottas was in the lead, and it was a great overtake.
Big toe on this circuit, like big drag down to that first corner. Like the DRS is really effective.
It's a long old straight, isn't it?
Goes downhill as well, yeah. So yeah, Bottas was able to get a really good start, and that put him in the hot seat.
Yep.
But then after 4 corners, we had a safety car.
We did. So I've got noted down here because this time during the race I did make some notes. Thank you very much. I put Max had a good start, but then lost power when he went into 4th, which was it just went backwards. Such a good start, and then his car it was almost like he was braking. That's how many cars overtook him going into that turn 1. Dropped a handful of places and just put him in front of Kimi and Gasly, and obviously Kimi and Gasly came together and then collected Max on the way through. So Max was just a passenger in that incident. And then Gasly, who won last week's race, was now out of the race. Max Verstappen and Gasly, DNF, turn 2.
Yeah, it looked like on the onboard that Raikkonen just put too much power down too early, lost control of the car slightly and tapped Gasly. That's what it looked like from the onboard. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but that's what I saw at the time.
It did look like that. And Kimi got off lightly.
I don't know how he got away with that.
His car was absolutely untouched, like from a tyre perspective and a front wing perspective. It looked like it was in perfect condition. Whereas Gasly, it just ruined his race.
Raikkonen had a bit of an adventure today, actually, because obviously he managed to escape all of those incidents. And then he got his penalty for deciding at the last minute to sort of throw himself into the pit lane.
I know. I need to look back on that, actually. Not the actual race, but I'm sure I've seen drivers do that before. I've seen Mercedes drivers do that before, and I know I have in recent years, and I don't know if that's been followed up with the same penalty. So something I'm interested to look at. If I do find anything, I'll pop it down on our YouTube comments, or I'll mention it on Twitter if you're interested in finding out. But the next thing which happened was Sainz just pirouetted, and we didn't see an onboard of this for a good 10 laps later. They just refused to show an onboard of what happened between Sainz and what now we know was Stroll. They tapped a little bit, but just spun round in the middle of turn 3, which was unfortunate, and collected a couple of cars through.
He was battling. There, and obviously just maybe a tiny bit of contact. I couldn't see all of it. Like you said, it wasn't really shown very clearly.
No, not
But
at all.
yeah, for whatever reason, just lost it and went round.
It was the tiniest touch
Funny
as
watching
well.
Vettel trying to avoid it as well. You saw Vettel like trying to second guess which way he was going. And he still
Yeah.
ended up being wrong.
Vettel weaved a couple of times and then ended up just knocking off his front wing anyway, which was the start of his demise into this Grand Prix.
Leclerc had a great start.
He did. He was up
he
into
went from
P3,
fifth
wasn't
to
he?
third.
Yeah. It was a very good start. Or very promising for the Ferrari driver. But again, the same happened, unfortunately, going through the race. Just didn't have the pace to continue with it. In the corners or on the straight, just was absolutely nowhere. And it's such a shame. Because he's got the drivability. They both have. They just haven't got the car at the moment.
Yeah, so we've ended up with this safety car. Then we have our restart. And then immediately there is another incident. So what did you see going on here? What was your view on this rather bizarre incident on the restart going down this main straight?
So this was lap 33, wasn't it? No, that was that's something else. So it was rolling restart under the safety car. So it was.
We'd only actually had a few 100 meters of racing by this point.
I think by lap we were on lap 10, and I think we'd had no racing laps. It was a bit silly. So Bottas is still in P1 at this point, and he's been instructed by his engineer that don't put your foot down out of the last corner because the toe is so great that you'll only get mugged off by Hamilton or get overtaken by Hamilton by turn 1. So Bottas is within his right to go whenever he deems fit.
He controls the pace once the safety car is in, yeah.
Hamilton's done it hundreds of times before. Many other drivers have done it before, so this was Bottas's time. And he wanted to protect his lead, so he wanted to go at late as possible, which is completely understandable. You have to go before or on the start-finish line, if that's what I understand. So as soon as you pass that start-finish line, it's green light racing. But if you decide to put your foot down beforehand, it's up to racing speed.
Well, I think it's sort of like once you pass the start-finish line,
it's free for
you
all,
are now racing.
Yes.
Basically, you are now racing.
But he chooses when to bolt. So Hamilton, if they decided to bolt on the last corner, Hamilton would have to stay in the slipstream or just alongside Bottas until the start-finish line and then create the overtaking opportunity. Anyway, so Bottas left it quite late, undoubtedly, probably just at the finish line. I think it was grid position number 6, which is when he put his foot down, which is only 3 rows back at the end of the day. So it was probably 10 meters before the start-finish line. So, but behind, it wasn't Bottas's issue. Bottas was weaving to keeping the temperature in his tyres and wasn't speeding up or slowing down. But some cars behind him were almost pre-guessing when Bottas was about to jump and would speed up.
Some people leaving gaps and the like.
Yes, yeah. So they were speeding up and then slowing down and creating this concertina effect. And unfortunately, that works quite well if you're in the top 7 or 8 because you have good vision of what's going on at the start of the grid. You can see all the cars in front of you. But if you're back in, P15 to P20, you're just seeing cars put their foot down, almost go up to racing speed, and then we had a pretty horrific accident. From everyone's perspective, we were very lucky that people walked away from that incident okay. I know Carlos Sainz hurt his wrist. He's now said it's fine, but yeah, it was. The onboards were pretty scary, and I just want to mention again how reluctant we were. I feel like the F1 community was a little bit reluctant as a majority about the halo and how it hindered. It didn't do the aesthetics of the cars very. Didn't make them very pleasing. I was always for. I think a lot of people were, but there was a largely majority that wasn't for the halo. But there was bits of carbon fiber, front wings, tires bouncing off halos today, and that would have been drivers' crash helmets they were hitting instead of that halo. So again, really thankful that safety has come so far in this sport, and that these drivers can get out of these horrific crashes and walk across the grid and then go chill in their garage for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, I think on the restart, I think it might have possibly been Russell who left a bit of a gap, then moved to catch up a little bit, but the people behind him thought that he'd gone.
Yep.
And then the concertina effect was so great that it wasn't possible for the cars that had now gone to stop in time, and then it was.
So Sainz went straight into the back of, was it Magnussen? No, it can't have been Magnussen. Magnussen was collected later on. I can't
Definitely
remember.
a Haas involved. There was there,
Yeah.
and Giovinazzi was there as well.
But Sainz went into the back of, I think it was the Alfa Romeo at quite a speed and mounted him. And, I think Nicholas
And of course,
Latifi got
a lot of
hit.
the cars had a lot of the cars had been keeping really close together because it's quite a narrow track on the whole. So I think they were kind of itching to get past, unlike other types of sport where you kind of wouldn't necessarily do that. It wouldn't be much of an advantage to leaving gaps.
Absolutely.
And then trying to push. In Formula One, though, obviously the nature of the overtaking means that there was an advantage to be had there. And maybe they got a bit confused when they saw the green flag and they saw, oh, let's go. But, that's obviously not necessarily what that means.
Especially as Turn 1 was a proven really good overtaking opportunity. We saw multiple drivers go around the outside of Turn 1 and pull off some pretty special moves. But yeah, there was a green flag across the gantry on the start-finish line. And, the commentators did a good job of clearing this all up. But that green flag is just to show that actually we're under racing conditions. But these racing conditions are to prepare for racing. It's not necessarily put your foot down, we're going racing. It's actually the safety car is in now and the control of the pack is under the first driver. Whether there was confusion or not when the drivers, but yeah, the Constantino effect just messed up a lot of drivers today. And we're lucky it was on the scale it was.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, but a shame to see a couple of drivers out. So it's a shame to see Sainz come out of the race. He obviously already had a spin on lap 1. I'm not quite sure what position he was in, but that's why he was at the back of the grid and obviously was hindered so much by this Constantino effect. Nicholas Latifi got collected. A tyre went into his side radiator and punctured a hole through it. So he pulled over quite nicely, actually. Very well done on the pit exit. Not quite on the pit exit, but in that direction. So the pit lane could remain open. For the time being, they actually ended up getting a trolley wheel thing and wheeling him back into the pit lane. So that was good of him to position his car there. Kevin Magnussen also got collected. It wasn't Roman Grosjean. It was Kevin Magnussen.
It's another DNF for Magnussen.
Yeah, it's his fifth this year.
He's had quite a few this season.
I think they said it's his fifth this year, and we're only on, that's almost half his races so far. But that caused the red flag, the second red flag of the year. Second in 2 races.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of unusual, certainly, to have this kind of situation, to have the double red flags. It's funny, the last red flag before that would have been Baku 2017. And then we had obviously the one in Monza.
Yep.
And then we've had 2 in a row, and the last time we had 2 in a row was 2011. So just shows how uncommon it is to have a red flag in a session. And they've happened at 2 kind of like classic tracks, 2 kind of old school tracks, as we were talking about.
So you're not wrong.
It shows the danger of the newer tracks for sure.
Yep.
The older tracks, sorry. It shows the danger of the older tracks.
Because they have limited access and, just a different driving style. They don't have the runoffs of these new tracks. You look at Sochi, you've got quite large runoffs. Same with Bahrain, really large runoffs. Whereas this track didn't. It had gravel and then tyre barriers. So, yeah, the first red flag, everyone went into the pit lane and it was due to the amount of rubble and obviously the cars on the pit straight, which is why they had to. Initially, they were just going to say drive through the pit lane, but they decided to red flag the session.
There was a horrendous amount of debris.
It was everywhere.
And they needed quite a bit of time to clear the cars, although they did a fantastic job to clear it as quickly as they could. And we saw lots of new soft tyres going on in preparation for the restart. So everyone, looking to get very racy very quickly. Because we're going to have another standing start, which is good. I like standing starts over rolling starts, definitely.
Yes, especially after last week.
Yeah,
makes it way more exciting.
Because it shows whether or not, and we'll talk about this more later, I'm sure, but it shows yet another vital skill as part of this thing we call racing. You actually had to show quite a breadth of skills in this race in order to achieve something. We had lots of restarts, we had some overtaking going on, but then there was changing strategies and unfamiliar conditions. So there was a lot of excitement coming to it because of that.
I was getting excited because George was up. At this point, there was like 4 or 5 DNFs. I think there was 5 because 2 cars went off on lap 1 and then 3 cars have been taken out on
We were
just
going to
before
have 14 cars on the restart, I believe.
Yeah. And
which
I was
became
like,
13 when Ocon withdrew.
yes. And at this point, I was like, Russell could score points. That was going through my
Yeah.
head. I wasn't really focused on the top three. I really wasn't. I was thinking, I mentioned in the podcast last week, I want Russell to score points by the end of the year. And I was like, blimey, could it be today? Unfortunately not. But I was on the edge of my seat, like shouting at the TV. But
he came pretty damn close.
He did. And we'll get on to why he didn't manage it later on in the race on the last, when we get to the end of the race discussion. But yeah, everyone making strategic moves in the pit stops, changing their tires, cooling the engine, cooling the brakes, because that's why Ocon retired, wasn't it? Because the brakes caught fire, it got too hot, and then melted their components, and they can only switch out like for like components. The components have to be heavier or the same weight as the component they've just switched out. They're not allowed to be lighter, and with the substantial damage to the brake. The brake was actually like lighter or heavier than it usually was, so they couldn't put the new component in. It was too dangerous, and basically the regulations didn't allow such a move, which was a shame. But it was just another one of those teams which then only had one car on the grid.
Yeah, and by the end of this race, there's only two teams left that could claim it, wasn't it? Mercedes and Ferrari.
Yeah, absolutely.
So lots of people missing a sort of their support, missing any sort of strategy that involved the positioning of both cars, and then we ended up with a restart with our standing start. Now at this point we have Hamilton in the lead.
Yep,
and we have Bottas ready to take that toe again, ready to get back up into the lead, take the position back. I mean, he was calling for a safety car, wasn't he? He was like, now would be a good time for a safety car.
Yes, he was.
And he got it. So this was it. He was kind of ready to pounce. We also had Ricciardo looking to take advantage of his position because he had managed to find himself up into that potential bet-winning position of third place.
Blimey, yeah. So he was in P3, wasn't he?
He was, and I think he was looking to make it even more if he could.
Well, I think his quote was, "Let's finish what we started." And I was like,
Indeed,
that is a man who wants to get down to business. And business is what he got down to on that restart.
Yeah, so restart kicked off and he was straight into second.
Yeah, without a doubt, flash of an eye, he was straight into second, took it around the outside of Bottas. And I tell you what, I don't want to bash Bottas too much on this podcast, but for a guy who is trying to challenge for the championship and needs to reel in some points, he had a really good start to the race. And he, his qualifying wasn't too bad either. He was only a half a tenth away from beating Hamilton, which was a lot closer than he's been in recent races. And on lap one, he obviously took Hamilton into turn one. And then it just slipped back ever so slightly. And this was his chance. He called for it. This was his chance. I really need a safety car. Get the pack back together. Go for it. Drop the position on turn one. And how many times have we seen Bottas drop it on the first lap of a race? And this is essentially what it was.
I mean, at the very least, he's got to be able to hold his position, hasn't he? Like, he's got to be able to maintain what he's doing.
Yeah.
And, there are far too many incidents really, where he's not capitalizing, like you say. That's not against someone like Lewis Hamilton, who doesn't make those kind of mistakes. It's very rare.
He's probably made all the mistakes he's made this year. Like this whole 10-second stop and go from last week will probably be will arguably the biggest mistake he's made this year. And will probably be the biggest mistake he will make this year. So Bottas has got to sit there and capitalize on any mistakes, and he's just not doing it. And after last week, you would think he would be wanting to nail everything, but he just hasn't. He was so
Hamilton
deflated.
Was sitting there on the standing start as well with his. I'm thinking of the.
You're thinking of the Stroll incident, aren't you?
I'm thinking of the second restart where he had his brakes were smoking. I was thinking of that incident.
Yep.
But we end up with this other one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the second
fair
restart
enough.
because he was second that time, and he would have been on the right hand side.
Of course,
of the grid
you're correct. Yep.
So we end up with another restart. Ricciardo does really well to take his second place. He has a great move. And I'm trying to think of what else happened straight after this restart. I think
I didn't put down any notes. The next notes I've got is for lap 33, but between there and then, obviously Bottas got his position back. It was a really good DRS pass on the straight, which was always going to happen. and then they were jostling for positions behind. Actually, I don't know if they changed at all. They were fighting quite well. They were tantalizingly close to be within that 1 second mark. But if one driver got it, they all got it, and then they all got DRS, so cancelling out the effects of DRS, and let's force the train. But what I really want to know and talk to you about is Bottas on the radio. And I've just said how he gave up that position, but he came back with fighting spirit and said, whatever Hamilton does, I want the opposite.
Yeah.
That's a bold move. And I want to go into why I think that's a bold move. Because he knows he's not going to beat Hamilton on a like-for-like strategy, on a like-for-like straight fight. He hasn't done it in a long time. And it doesn't look like Hamilton's easing off anytime soon. So Bottas's only chance was if Hamilton went on the hards, he would go on the mediums, the faster tyre, and fight for position, fight for that track position. Or if Hamilton went on the mediums, he would go on the hards, and hopefully his tyres would last longer than Hamilton's, and he would fight towards the end of the race. And I thought, you know what? Instead of asking Mercedes to go on a specific tyre, they've put them in a really difficult position, actually. He is asked to go on the opposite of Hamilton's choice, of Hamilton's strategy. And that's forcing Mercedes to pitting their drivers against each other, like putting their drivers against each other to create a race. And I thought, actually, how many times does that happen? Because usually drivers radio in saying, I hate these softs, get me on the hards, or I hate these hards, get me on the mediums. They're not working. They're very specific about what tyre they want. Although Bottas wanted the opposite. He wanted that chance to fight for P1.
It's a bold move. It's good to see him getting sort of bold with it. And I think he needs to take that kind of spirit, play a few mind games, get the team thinking about the positions. Maybe he can capitalize on the situation in a way that's unexpected and doesn't just let the team go, yeah, we've got 1 and 2. Let's just, keep it nice and calm and bring them home. Sort of thing. It avoids that kind of situation, which is good for everyone watching. And, Bottas was hoping it would be good for him as well.
It definitely spiced stuff up because in the back of my head, I'm like, right, I bet you were there on the radio to Hamilton now saying, right, Bottas has requested this strategy. You need to put out a lead because the undercut, it was very effective on this circuit. It was, a couple of cars. We saw it over the last 33 laps. And Hamilton then started to put out a lead. And I was like, they're going to do it. They're going to put these drivers against each other. We're going to have a race to the finish. Like, not only between P3 and P12 or 13, which was what we had on the grid at the time, but, on the top 2 as well. They clearly both had pace. Qualifying was so close to each other, and let's give them a race. But then, unfortunately, Bottas then radioed in and said, I've got really bad vibrations on the front right unboxing. Well, how do you go on the opposite tyre to your teammate if they haven't boxed already? You can't.
Well, I think he was told to box, but what he said basically meant that he needed to pit.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we entered this phase in the race where, like you say, the undercut was going to be very powerful, and people were deciding what to do with their tyres and what strategy moves they were going to make. And Bottas wanted the opposite, but then he reported these vibrations. They were reporting problems with their tyres. This was a thing that happened again with Mercedes as well, because they were both told to stay off the curbs at one point.
Yeah,
we've heard that before. And so Bottas had to pit. Ended up on hards. Hamilton just ended up
on the same tyre.
He gets the same thing, and he avoided the undercut. He still came out quite a considerable amount in front.
He was quite lucky though, wasn't he? Because the safety car came out and picked up everyone behind Bottas, including Bottas. So Bottas pitted. Hamilton had already gone past the pit entry at this point and had started his next racing lap when the safety car came out. So obviously he reduced his speed to whatever delta they have to reach to, under a safety car lap. And then Bottas made the call, or the team made the call to bring Bottas in. I thought, you know what, fantastic. Bottas is now going to have a pit stop on Hamilton because Hamilton is going to collect the car and be on old tyres. I thought we're actually going to have a really good fight towards the end of the race with P1 and P2. But Hamilton was incredibly lucky in the sense that the safety car came out, picked up Bottas and the grid behind him. By this point, Hamilton had, continuing his lap at a much greater speed. And just before Hamilton entered the pits, the safety car let everyone go through to then collect Hamilton on the next lap. So actually Hamilton, who didn't manage to get the free pit stop originally, ended up getting the free pit stop and maintaining his P1 as well. So whether that be luck or skill or just, it's just it's just the cards you're dealt. I thought that was quite interesting.
We also saw Leclerc had his plan C again, where he went on the hards.
Oh, blimey, yep.
We also had Norris looking for the undercut on Perez, but it looked like actually he had the pace on him and he ended up overtaking him. I think that was around lap 28, 29. And then so we had this kind of like round of pit stops. And then Leclerc ended up pitting again, by the way. I mentioned he got onto hards. He only did 17 laps on those hards.
Yes, yeah.
And then pitted again.
Yeah, because they weren't very good, were they? He was complaining about them quite a lot.
Yeah, he really struggled, Leclerc, after the DRS was activated. He just started tumbling down the positions. He wasn't able to fight. He was getting absolutely mugged on those straights. There was a pretty clear illustration of the continuing problems when I think it was about lap 25, like about halfway through the race or thereabouts. We had all the remaining Ferrari-powered cars sat at the back of the pack.
And then George Russell was pulling away, creating a gap between him and I think it was Vettel at the time.
Yeah, he kept Vettel at arm's distance, no problem.
He did.
He was pushing hard, but he made it happen.
Yep. He could smell the points.
He was about ninth then, wasn't he? This is when he was on ninth on his mediums.
Yep. Which was a good call by Williams. Putting him on the Williams, it really paid off towards the end. Well, he didn't pay off towards the end. He didn't get his ultimate goal, which was to score a point, but kept him in the pack.
Did you see what happened with Raikkonen's pit stop? This is about similar time, like lap 28, 29.
What, deciding to go into the pit stop across the, the red, white, and yellow. The red, white, and yellow?
Oh, no, this is later on. I'm talking about the one where he, because this is what I'm talking about. This is part of Raikkonen's big adventure that he had today. I mean the one where they looked like they had like a problem with the left rear. Then there was a delay.
Problem. Yeah.
And the jack operator they didn't put the car down because it seemed like the light hadn't changed. So they were ready to go. Everyone was waiting for it to go. The jack operator's like, nah, red light. Not going to do it.
I can't do it. And Kimby spun up his tyres as well, didn't he?
You could see the tyres.
Yeah. He was like, why am I not going anywhere?
It was pretty comical.
Yeah.
Not sure what's going down in the pits with Alfa Romeo. Some kind of problem with their lights. And
a bit of a technical fault. But they should definitely have like a manual override standing by straight away because they lost the valuable seconds in that pit stop.
It's like a 12-second stop or something. So
I didn't realize it was that long, but yeah.
It was pretty bad.
Yep.
Ricciardo also had a successful undercut. That was on Stroll.
Yeah, so Ricciardo's still in P4 at this time, isn't P3 at this time?
He was overtaken by Albon after the last safety car. So at this point, he must have been in third still.
Yeah. Because he had a good start.
Well, at least this was his move into third because Stroll was ahead of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I've not got much. That was lap 33 was all the tyre information with Bottas and the pit. And lap 45 was the second red flag.
Yeah, we saw Stroll, obviously the first look was that he had binned it into turn 9.
It looked quite horrific as well. We've had some high-profile crashes the last couple of weeks, including this week.
Yeah, something happened with like possibly debris damaging his car going into it. But yeah, he was a passenger. There's nothing he could do about it. He was actually doing a really good race. I've been really quite impressed with Stroll, and he's continued to outperform Perez.
Yes.
So he was unfortunate here to get that damage, and it was a big, big hit, a very big shunt into that barrier.
Before this happened, I was convinced that he was a P3 contender. I thought, could he possibly get 2 podiums on the trot? I was like, that would be massive for Racing Point. And what a great way to cement your position within that team, especially with all the questions around, obviously, Vettel and Perez, and why it wasn't Stroll. I think actually that would have been a great way to cement that win. Like you said, he's been outperforming Perez for a couple of weeks now. And today was one of those points up until his accident. There were questions whether, going back to the accident now, whether he had picked up a puncher or a puncher going into that corner, quite a high-speed corner. And what I noticed after the accident, and it took him a long time to actually get a camera on Stroll, which is always a bit concerning when you're a Formula One fan and they don't cut straight to the accident or they don't show a replay straight away. We've seen it in Russia a couple of years ago when was it Kvyat who had quite a nasty accident, and they red flagged it and didn't show the incident straight away because they didn't get a response back from the car itself or on the radio. He took a long time to get out of that vehicle. A really long
He
time. I wasn't quite
must
sure.
have been pretty shook. He must have hit it
Yeah,
pretty hard.
it looked
'Cause
like
it certainly didn't slow down much.
the chassis was in. Well, the rear end of the chassis was off. Well, wasn't where it should be. It was off to the right. It had bent round, and the front car was completely ruined as well. You could see this more evidently when they hooked it up on the crane and started pushing it back into the runoff area, into the slip road. How broken that car was. So yeah, for I just don't like see drivers take a long time to get out of cars. It's just not nice to see. There's nothing
Yeah, I
else to
think
it, really.
he probably was just taking a moment to because there was an onboard where he was like rubbing his eyes and he just kind of looked a little bit like he was making sure he was okay with himself before he got out. I think obviously in that moment he's not necessarily thinking, oh, if I don't get out the car, people will think something's happened to me.
Happened.
So,
just feels like an age
but-
for any Formula One fan who's watching the TV waiting to see a driver show some kind of movement or self-extract. That's the key thing. If they can self-extract, then 9 times out of 10 they're 99 times out of 100 they're usually okay. Just took a lot longer than I was expecting, and it just like I said, this week and last week we've had, and actually going back to Spa, we've had some really high-profile impacts and accidents, and I think we've been very lucky that all the drivers have walked away from all of them. Going back to Giovinazzi in the Spa, and George Russell collecting him, all the way back to last week, and Leclerc in the barrier. Now this week, the start-finish straight was just horrific, and now Stroll went off at one of the fastest corners over the whole calendar into a tyre wall. It was pretty bad, to be honest.
Yeah, they're very scary incidents, but it's part of the sport. It's part of the risk that's involved in motorsport at any level, and at Formula One, the highest level, the risk becomes even greater, and sometimes just awful things happen. But I think that we've seen the effectiveness of the halo today, and we've seen how sturdy these cars are.
Oh, absolutely.
And we've seen that coming back to these older tracks, presents just that little bit more danger than something we might expect at a more modern venue. I can't help but be a little bit thrilled by that.
Yes.
To be honest, but I think I can only really say that because nothing bad has happened.
It was a fantastic race with lots of drama, and looking back on it, it was good to see. It's good to see cars struggle and drivers struggle, and these incidents happen, not to this magnitude, but it was an exciting race. But like you said, does it go back to the characteristics of the track? The last 3 races I've just mentioned,
I think it
Spa, Monza, and now Mugello, have all had high impact, high profile crashes, and they're all old, classic circuits.
And it's not just whether or not there's runoff or gravel traps or all that. I mean, that's important as well for just kind of the look and feel of the way that people will approach certain corners, knowing whether or not they're going to go into, if it's like Paul Ricard, where no matter what you do, you're going into acres and acres of tarmac.
Yeah.
It's,
you can get lost in that circuit.
Yeah, exactly. You just go down one of the other random tracks and end up sort of 30 miles away without realizing. You do a Kimi Räikkönen, when he got lost.
In Brazil, didn't he?
Yeah, he just get lost, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not like that. It's it's got the thrill and the danger of that old school circuit. But it's also the way they design it. I mean, I loved how undulating this track is, and the camber into all the corners. And when you're trying to really hit it hard, the way that the car is moving up and down also affects the nature of the downforce and the way that the car moves on its chassis, and that in turn will affect the feel for the driver. Definitely the design of these tracks has a huge impact on their, how thrilling they are to drive for the drivers, but also their safety, and when the limits are tested, how big the accidents are.
Yep, absolutely. Completely agree.
So then we had another safety car which turned into another red flag.
Yep, almost red flag pretty instantly. Again, due to the nature of the circuit, not many extraction points for vehicles or to get those vehicles on the track to help remove the Formula One car. Not as long this time. It was probably only for 20 minutes. I think it was.
Yeah, they just need to repair the barrier like they did at Monza. It was like they just needed to make sure that, if there were another accident, there was the same barrier there to protect.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think anything interesting happened during that red flag of any. I know a lot of drivers got out again, went to go see their physios, go speak to their engineers, go speak to their teammates, etc. I know Lando was talking to Carlos on the pit wall during the red flag, which I think is just it's a nice thing to see those two work together, even though one of them's out of the race. It was really good to see. Apparently, Carlos was going through all of Lando's onboards and pointing out things and seeing where he could help out. And I thought that's a good partnership there, and it's almost a shame it's coming to an end next year. We're gonna miss those two as a coupling on the grid, but I'm sure Daniel Ricciardo
Think
will
of the
step
Danny
up.
Rick.
It's gonna
Think
be
of the Danny Rick.
The banter will be brutal, but I can't wait. But did anything happen during that red flag, which I can't remember, to be honest.
Nothing immediately springs to mind.
No.
We just ended up again with another standing start, and it looks a bit empty by this point.
Yeah,
we were missing quite a few cars at this point.
I think at this point there was 12 cars on the grid.
Yeah.
We were 8 cars down, which mimicked Austria's opening race. I believe they had 8 cars down. We didn't have a standing start in Austria, but yeah. And this is a track as well. I've noticed on the grid, on the start-finish line, there is a lot of grid spaces. I think there's like 50 spaces on that grid. And to fill up 12 of them just seemed so underwhelming going into the last sprint of this race. It was probably I think it was a 14-lap sprint towards the end.
So this is also now where, because of, we mentioned that we've had all of these pit stops and the like, we end up with our last restart. And this time, Hamilton is in second.
Yep.
His brakes smoking, as we mentioned before.
And they were almost on fire. Like, that car looked like it was having some serious cooling issues. I don't understand why he was the only person on the grid. He did exactly the same as every other car, just drove to the grid space. But clearly his brake ducts were probably, it just goes to show how Mercedes designed their car, was probably a little bit smaller, so couldn't get as much cooling or couldn't dissipate the heat as quickly as other cars. But
they've had cooling problems before, haven't they? So.
Yep, absolutely. Especially in tracks like Singapore, which the temperatures today almost reached as hot as Singapore would during the evening, which is just completely crazy. But I thought this would create an interesting start. I thought Hamilton might be under threat here for the second week in a row. He might have some issues, which he's going to have to deal with. But I was so wrong.
Yeah, Bottas just had a terrible, terrible start. Again, this was supposed to be how he was going to really cement this race. He got his safety car, got what he wanted, and he blew that one. He gets another bite of the cherry, another chance. And he wasn't able to do anything meaningful with it. But more than that, I was devastated by Russell's start.
Oh, I know.
It just didn't happen for him. It completely messed it up. Raikkonen had an amazing restart.
Yep, he was rapid.
But yeah, it was, he just
because let's face
lost
it,
unfortunately.
All eyes were on Russell at this point. We couldn't really care what was happening at the top of the grid. I saw all over social media. The Williams crew would have been thinking it, guys, there's 12 cars left in this race. One of them's an Alfa Romeo. 2 of them are, Ferraris. We've already outdragged the Ferrari down the straight. This could be Russell's maiden F1 point. Or points, as it may have been. He almost got 2. He was in 8th.
It was 9th at one point, yeah.
He was 9th at one point. I thought, what a way to start. I was also thinking, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but sucks for Claire and Frank. Like, if they did score a point this week, they left F1 last week for the first thing. No, they left their heritage team, and then next week Russell brings home a point. I was like, nothing you can do about that, but that would almost be a bit ironic.
At least they got to see a point last year, I guess.
Yep, then
they got 1 point.
We've still got time this year.
Still time.
But yeah, he dropped back 3 positions. He was at the back, wasn't he? He dropped back within the first lap, which was a shame.
Yeah, it was straight down to 12th. Albon didn't get a particularly good getaway either.
No, he made life hard for himself, to be honest.
He definitely it did it the hard way, as I believe Christian Horner put it.
Yeah,
but
over the radio. But he came alive. He was comfortable. He was racing. Was it because he wasn't being directly compared to his teammate who had lost it on lap 1? I have no idea what goes on in that team's mindset, we've had this conversation. There's no need to have it again. But for whatever reason, he pulled out the bag this week, and he was driving superbly. But up until that point, there was a lot of. I was watching more of the back of the grid while Albon was. Albon did a couple of good overtakes to get into his position. Did he do Perez and Ricciardo to get into P3? I believe so.
Yeah. So Albon. He overtook Perez the first time on about lap 18. Then he ended up having to take Leclerc, obviously, who was tumbling down the order a few laps later. But it was when Albon got into the mediums that he really started looking very comfortable. He set the fastest lap at one point. It was about
He
lap
did,
40. He didn't get away too well on the restart, but he made up for it by taking Perez again shortly after. And then it was about 50 or 51 where he had that huge sort of drag down the main straight, the DRS zone. And again, it's almost become a bit of a signature for him to have these really calm, sweeping overtakes around the outside. But we've seen him try to do it a couple of times and it's ended up in disaster where he's been tapped.
Yep.
But this time he did it. I remember we did it into Cops when we were at Silverstone.
Yep.
That was on Raikkonen, I believe.
Some amazing moves.
Yeah, I really like that overtake from Albon on Ricciardo. I mean, it's not easy to outbrake Ricciardo and cake him around the outside. So
no, absolutely. But he is in his old car.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's not quite as good that Red Bull as it used to be. I don't think.
No,
it seems like it's pretty
agree.
difficult to drive.
But at this point, Kimi and can I just mention that for what started trending on Twitter worldwide because Kimi Räikkönen was handed a 5-second penalty for crossing the white line whilst entering the pits. Slam dunk penalty, no questions asked about it. Again, I mentioned at the start of this podcast whether I think other drivers have done that before and got away with it, but I'll look into that. But 5-second penalty, and the engineer spoke to Kimi on the radio and said, "Right, we've got a 5-second penalty which will be added to the time, your finishing time at the end of the race." And Kimi responded with, "For what?" And the engineer then responded with, "We've got a 5-second time penalty which will be added to your time at the end of the race." So then
Kimi responded with, just said what?
Yes.
Thought he just said what and not for what.
And then Kimi did Kimi and just unleashed Kimi and went, "For what?" at the top of his voice. Or I can't remember if there was an expletive in there or not. But within minutes, that was then trending on social media, which I thought was hilarious.
Yes, he's Formula One's grumpy old man, isn't he? Kimi Räikkönen.
Yeah. Up until next year when Alonso returns, we'll see who's got more airtime then. But what was interesting about this 5-second penalty was that actually that would maybe put Russell back in contention for P10. And they were jostling, Vettel and Russell were jostling for DRS. Vettel was obviously trying to get away from the DRS and Russell was doing really good at gaining. So if I talk about Russell beforehand, was closing Vettel quite nicely.
He overtook Grosjean first because obviously he was in 12.
Got past Grosjean pretty easily and then was...
It's honestly just nice to see a Williams overtaking another car on merit, to be honest.
It really is. It really is. It's a sight for sore eyes.
It's not a sight we see very often.
No, and hopefully it's a sight we see more often.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting him to chase down Vettel, but he was closing that gap. We had 6 or 7 laps to go and he was closing a 10th per lap, getting a little bit closer. Clearly, the Williams needs some work in the high speed corners and and the low speed corners of this track. Whereas the Ferrari probably has a bog standard setup, but the Williams was definitely faster on the strength, so was gaining ever so slightly until he got tantalizingly close to the DRS and then went quite wide in one of the corners and then lost about 1.5 seconds, which was soul destroying. Because I think
it was also that Vettel had got DRS himself.
DRS
as well.
on Raikkonen or Leclerc at the time.
So that didn't help basically. But yeah, him going wide, that was probably pushed him out of the realm where he could have fought back. He could have got DRS and then matched on the DRS and then tried to fight that way.
And that's how I hoped it would play out. But then Raikkonen's penalty came into play, and then for a good 3 laps, I think for the rest of the race, we had a little delta on the left-hand side of the screen, which was the difference between Russell and Raikkonen, and it was getting so close. Again, I don't want to use the word tantalizingly close again, but it was within 0.5 second at points of being within the points, and then he just used up all his energy, whether he'd used it before, and dropped back to 2.5 seconds off Raikkonen.
George was giving it some serious beans against Vettel, no doubt. Slight mistake. We can really only put a lot of this down to inexperience, because I think a lot of people who watch this and they know how good Russell is. They know. I mean, we've seen before how tidy he can be, but it's only his second season, so he needs a little bit more experience racing with people as well, because that's a situation he's just not really been in as often. I mean, the first season he did in Formula One, he basically was almost never in that situation where he's actually trying to catch someone and has a chance of doing it. So he needs more experience doing that in the car, and he's getting it.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time until he starts getting. I believe what you said. And, I'm on board of the.
They only
Hopefully,
get
he
points
gets his
by the end of
first
the year.
points by the end
Yeah.
of the year. I think it's definitely possible. Circumstances have made it more possible today, but who's to say we won't have circumstances like that in future races? I mean, what a roller coaster this season has been. So we never know.
I know, right? I mean, we were only
It's so
saying
boring, this Formula One, isn't it? God, isn't it dull?
blimey.
Nothing
I
ever
know.
happens. It's just the same thing every week, isn't it, basically?
We were saying last week, next week's race probably won't be as exciting as this week's race, but you know what? We've got racing and we should be happy that racing is back. And then this week happens. We're like, you know what? Blimey, it's happened again.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And we've got all these like records being broken or about to be broken. And
oh, blimey. Hamilton breaks a new record every time he steps foot into that car. It's unbelievable. Like 90 wins now? 90 wins.
Yeah, 90. It's 90.
It's 90. And 91 is the magic number, isn't it?
That's to equal the Schumacher record.
Yeah, and that's.
I mean, I have to say that if you're watching the current Formula One season and you still think that it's boring, maybe you're just not that into Formula One.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to turn anyone off the sport, but like, come on, I think it's pretty good.
It's so good at the moment.
It's
what
great.
a year it's turned out to be. And like I said, let's get these tracks back in the calendar. Not every year. Don't want to get like, to the point where we see this track every single year. But we have no historic data for this track, and it created an absolute masterclass of a race. Like, accidents aside, it was still going to be a good race. Like, the nature of that track was going to be a good race. It's just one of those things.
So we enter the final stages of the race now.
Yes.
Now we're into like the last little bits. We've had we've had Russell chasing and he kind of misses out there. We have Grosjean actually make a really nice move on Leclerc at the restart, which you not mentioned. I have this in my notes. I made a point of it. I thought it was a really nice overtake from Grosjean. It showed his experience and obviously left just enough room to make it happen. Unfortunately, he does get taken by Leclerc again shortly after. But shout out for Grosjean, who not only did very well to avoid the second incident on the start finish line.
He was close.
He was
as well.
caught up and all of that. But yeah,
he had debris in his
trouble.
visor. His bouncing off his halo. He could have quite easily sailed into another car then, but he managed to negotiate the rubble and the cars and the debris. It was fair play to him.
Yeah, so he did really well there. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to Grosjean, who I thought, given what it is he's racing with, I thought showed some sparks of his experience and why he's in that seat. So yeah, even if it looks like Haas might be considering their options. I mean, I don't think they've signed anybody. They haven't signed either driver yet, have they? Nobody's confirmed at Haas.
No one's confirmed at Haas, and Hamilton is still not confirmed at Mercedes.
That's true. Yeah, he's not.
Could we see a shock swap? No, we will not.
So yeah, Lewis Hamilton crosses the line, nearly 5 seconds ahead of Valtteri Bottas.
Put his foot down, didn't he? He wanted that fastest lap.
Another domination.
He did achieve that fastest lap. There we go, 26 points. Bottas obviously, Bottas backed off a little bit on the penultimate laps, and Albon was almost within DRS reach. And I thought, hold on a second, is this going to happen? Could it be P2 for Albon? No, Bottas was just harvesting his energy, ready for a full deployment lap, and then set the fastest lap. And then caught up with Hamilton, who was clearly just doing the exact same thing. And then Hamilton decided to create like a 4.8 second gap towards second place, and just stormed across the finish. And what was he said it was a really tough race, and I completely appreciate that. He had to do some fighting, had to do 3 restarts. How many times in a race do you have to restart? This guy started 3 times, and 2 out of 3 of them were successful. So good racing.
And like we already mentioned, this race in general was a test of all sorts of different skills for all the drivers. Obviously, like you say, getting the multiple restarts and the nature of the track. So it was good that I think everyone got stretched. Yeah. Everyone found their limits today, which is always what we want to see in racing. Absolutely. We always want to see a bit of unpredictability, which is coming through from having these new tracks. And it would be nice to have more tracks involved and have slightly more rotating, having different tracks each season. But I understand the logistics of that are a nightmare, and it's really expensive and difficult to get a track up to standard. And building a new track is a whole different thing entirely. So, but we're lucky to get it this season because of the circumstances. So definitely enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is the first time that Mercedes have got a 1-2 and the
This year.
fastest lap this season. Yeah.
It's the first time they've taken home maximum points available to them. I don't know really what that shows. Does it show that their number 2 driver isn't? Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say he's the number 2 driver. Does it show that Bottas isn't where they want him to be? Mercedes have gone from year to year picking up maximum points, whether that be with the fastest lap when it was introduced or without it. They've been consistently dominating. And I'm not saying by any means that they're not dominating this year. I know how far ahead they are in the standings, and it's going to be a slam dunk win for Mercedes this year. But is Bottas, doing what he needs to do to stay in that team? Clearly, at the moment, yes, because he's signed for next year. But are we showing signs that he's actually under threat from other drivers in other teams? Don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say. He's certainly getting closer in qualifying. He's done really well there to get as close as he has.
He said that that's his main. That's what he needs to improve on most. That he needs to improve on his qualifying because he's constantly falling short of Hamilton, and then is always on the back foot during the race. Whereas I think if he out qualified Hamilton, he'd mentally and physically is in a better position going forward on Sunday.
I don't think, and somebody please correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't think that Valtteri Bottas has won a race where he has not been leading into turn 1. I don't think he's won a race where he's not done that. Because I think that if he can sort of get off on the right foot and lead, he seems to be able to have the ability to keep it together. But when he has to chase Hamilton out of turn 1, I think that's when it doesn't work. Or when he's chasing anyone into turn 1, he doesn't seem to be able to win then.
Maybe that's an RPM roundup we need to do on Bottas and Hamilton. I know it's been requested actually to do a little bit of a segment on Bottas and his career. So maybe we'll do that shortly.
So a couple of extra little bits just for the post race before we move on to our next section. I thought that obviously we have Albon finally getting his podium.
Yep.
First Red Bull driver that's not called Max Verstappen to get on the podium since Ricciardo in Monaco 2018.
Yeah, where he
I think
won.
it's been 25 podiums for Verstappen in that time. So
thank you for sticking with me.
That's what he said on the radio, isn't it?
That's a message, isn't it? A lot of people will be reading into that now. You'll be seeing the tabloids soon. Albon under threat, was leaving, but yeah, I don't know what to make of that. It's a nice message, I think. Does it show that he knows his seat's under threat? I don't know, but I think it's a really nice message, actually.
Yeah, I think I mentioned when we did our video, our RPM roundup about Gasly's future. Maybe Red Bull really have kind of learnt their lesson and that they need to stop swapping things around. They need to kind of trust that the guy's going to improve if they give him a chance and give him the right environment. So hopefully it will be the shake-up that Red Bull need because we want them. Everybody wants them to be competitive. Yeah. We don't want them to be having to be suffering for these things. So good for Albon. We might talk about him a bit more in a bit. But we also have, straight after the race, we already mentioned that when Hamilton got out of his car, we heard some cheers from the crowd, which makes a nice change.
And he pointed towards the fans. I was like, yes. I was like, this is great. It's slowly coming back to normal.
And the onboard of him at the end, he looked pretty exhausted. Like when he was just about to get out of his car, because it took him a little while. He was, preparing himself.
Yeah.
And so it looked like it was hard work, that race. And Hamilton also showed, his wholeheartedness for using his platform. He was wearing the Breonna Taylor t-shirt. He put it on straight away to go up and do the interviews and go onto the podium.
Yep.
And it wasn't like the cameras were like, "Oh no, we mustn't show that." Like,
no,
they showed a commitment to showing what he was trying to say. So
I think
fair play.
If he wants to use that platform to do that, then he should have the full support. He shouldn't be dictated to what you can and can't wear. I know there's rules and regs around sponsorship and stuff, but clearly he's ironed those out with his sponsors. Like he wears the suit everywhere else, and the merchandise everywhere he goes. So actually, if he wants to showcase something which is not right, then let him do it.
I don't know. He might have actually annoyed the sponsors by doing that. I think it's more that he's probably got he's probably got the blessing, however you want to put it, of the Formula One management themselves, because they will probably have had something to say about that being televised if that were the case. But it's he went up and did it. He showed us how serious he is about using his platform. So that was he had like he turned around to show the picture of her on the back, and
Yeah, I think it was
that,
nice.
it's a nice touch.
Yeah, he's got the platform, and so why not use it to raise awareness for whatever? Like, drivers have done it for different things across the years, and he's doing it for racism and equal opportunities, which I completely agree with.
Sometimes it feels like he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. He's in a no-win situation, isn't he? Like,
yeah, and
he does nothing. But you've got this platform and you should be doing more. And so he does it, and but you're a hypocrite. And
yeah, it's he's like you said, damned if you do and damned if he doesn't. Like we could do a whole segment of like why people hate Lewis Hamilton. Like he's trying his best to be carbon neutral.
There's quite an obvious reason why some people hate Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, but he he tries, for example, he tries to be carbon neutral, and he's got electric cars now, and he's like reducing his footprint, and sold his plane, and he does all this, but then he drives Formula One cars, and I understand, like he's making an effort to achieve that goal, whereas
it would be so easy for him to do nothing.
Oh, I know.
It would be so easy for him to just be like nothing and just completely ignore everybody.
It's mad that he does try.
But he doesn't.
Like you said, if he sat down and did nothing, flew his jets around the world and enjoyed his life, he'd be criticised. You're not doing anything for the environment. You're not doing anything for world peace. You're not doing anything to support racism. If you stand up on a podium and support these movements, F1 shouldn't be about politics. Why you bring politics into F1? I was like, these are from the same people. Let the guy do what he wants. Support him or don't. But this is a message which needs to be heard. Drivers will continue to do it throughout the year. Different messages will be raised across, going future. I know Ricardo's done some fundraising for the wildfires in Australia. No one gave him rubbish for it. Everyone supports their own different movements, but yeah,
we don't have the luxury of picking and choosing when certain issues are important.
Exactly.
If we're serious about actually doing something about them. So this whole, we can't have politics in Formula One. Well, that's ignoring quite a lot of lot of issues, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
it's a sport that has backings of lots of controversial characters and the like. And are we really going to just say and do nothing? It doesn't mean we have to upturn the entire sport. We can find a way,
but we can publicize a positive message. Yes.
Yeah, we can have a positive message and try and do something. Use the platform of Formula One to do something.
But you'll always have those people who
sometimes it'll be cringy and bumbling and won't work very well, but they're trying to do something. I got more respect for somebody who does something and who just sits around and does nothing.
They've, over the last 8 races now, I think, or 10, I can't remember how many we've had. The starting 1 minute for we racers won, and Black Lives Matter for Lewis Hamilton and his t-shirt was a bit janky to begin with. There wasn't much unity, but actually fast forward 8 races later, and we've got a really nice 1 minute segment of all the drivers pulling together and giving it a positive message. There we go. If you didn't like it beforehand, it's improved. It's a lot less janky now. It's not like you're sat there in a minute's silence. You're watching every single driver give their opinion, and it's for 60 seconds. Get over it. You could then have a bang of a race. It annoys me.
The video thing is kind of, I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about the video. I get why they've done it, but it's a little bit something and nothing. It's a bit too kind of generic in the way. Some of the drivers just say like, "I stand." I think that's all Kimi says in that video. Stand for what?
For what again? Hashtag for what?
Yeah, exactly.
But is that better than watching the drivers stand and kneel for a minute? I don't know.
For a sport that has got some, has had to do some serious like growing up in the last few years, I think all things considered, they're doing their best to use their platform in a way. Yeah. The only other option is to completely bin the entire sport. Yeah. Just bin everything basically and just start again from scratch. And I don't know, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. So.
No, I completely agree. And apologies for going off on a bit of a tangent there about those movements, but it's important to, if Alex and I want to talk about it, we will do. That's the point of our podcast.
We should rename the podcast Rant Per Minute, I think.
Yeah,
that would be a little bit more appropriate.
Yeah. Or Red Flag Per Minute. Oh,
yeah, that's definitely what we've been having here. It was certainly a red weekend, wasn't it, for Ferrari?
They got the support they wanted by red flags and red safety cars and red tractors and red fire extinguishers. And
they just forgot to put the prancing horse on any of the flags. It was just waved blank red flags for some reason.
Amazing. Should we move on?
Yeah, that's our post-race, or perhaps post-races, because it did feel like we had multiple races today. So
almost 3 of them.
Yeah. Right, let's move on to our driver of the day and championship standings. So the fans voted for Ricardo, I believe, was driver of the day that was voted.
By quite some margin.
Yeah, I mean, Ricardo drove a great race. He very, very close to getting his podium, winning his bet with a bitter ball.
Oh, yeah.
But my
almost.
driver of the day today is going to be Alex Albon.
Yes, you know what? I've just been looking at the list and no one else deserves it more than he does.
The pressure must have been building on him after the Gasly win. I'm sure that another media storm was cooking up just like it was with Gasly in the first instance.
Yeah.
I just hope that Albon's kind of broken the cycle now. And, he was looking really good when he was fighting other cars. We saw lots of overtakes for him today. We've spoken before about how he made it kind of hard on himself. He should have done better on the restarts. But he was looking very racy, especially when he got into the mediums. And it was ultimately Ricardo that he passed for that position. And Ricardo had no answer. Albon got straight out of his DRS. It wasn't like there was a tussle between them. It was pretty solid from Albon. And I think given that he's had to really, really fight to get into that position, he's come so close so many times. He didn't have Verstappen with him. Maybe that helped him not being compared, but I don't even know if he's necessarily thinking about that when he's racing. He's probably got he's probably got other things to think about rather than exactly where Verstappen is all the time. So
yeah, I completely agree. What you've said, if you can, nicely sums it up. He's been under a lot of pressure. He was under a lot of pressure this race. Had everything to lose and had everything to gain and nothing to lose. Compared to like the last week's race, pulled off some really good overtakes and brought it home in P3 and thoroughly deserves it. Like you said, I really hope this breaks the mold. First teammate of Max Verstappen to jump on the podium since Daniel Ricciardo in 2018 at Monaco.
Yep.
So they've gone a long time, like you said, with only one car achieving podiums. Alex has been so close so many times and always end up tangling with a Mercedes.
With the Hamilton.
With Hamilton. Hamilton this, Hamilton that, blah, blah, blah. But no, he managed to do it, brought it home to P3. And yeah, fantastic result. 15 extra points, which has moved him quite high up in the championship. Exactly what Red Bull would want.
Speaking of standings, yes. Speaking of standings, we have Albon moving up in the driver standings as a result of that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure.
He now goes above Stroll.
Yes, he's now sat in fifth.
I suppose we should also mention with Albon that this is the first time a Thai driver has got onto a Formula One podium in a World Championship race.
Blimey. So
because I think Prince Bira, I believe, is the name of the first Thai driver in Formula One who was on the podium, but it wasn't a World Championship race.
Okay.
I think I'm getting that right. Again, correct me loudly in the comments if that's not the case, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So Hamilton now leads the driver standings. It's on 190 to Bottas's 135.
55-point difference.
Verstappen now, having DNF twice so far in the season, is still on 110.
Yeah.
So not, he's basically a race win away from matching Bottas's points, assuming Bottas doesn't get any points.
And 3 race wins away from Hamilton.
Yeah.
So you can almost, I know we shouldn't, and technically he still can win, but Verstappen is out of championship contention, unfortunately, this year.
Yeah, in the way that these Mercedes are right now, I mean, that was pretty much a given. It's one of the few secure predictions one could make.
Oh, absolutely. But, he could have fought for P2 at one point. He probably still can, but it's a race win difference.
Yeah.
Norris is sat in
McLaren.
P4.
Yes. Yeah, Norris, I was going to say, McLaren, despite having only one car finish, they were slightly bolstered by the fact that Stroll obviously didn't finish for Racing Point, so they're kind of like pretty big competitors at the moment, those two. McLaren still holding on to third place in the Constructors, 106 to Racing Point's 92. There's a slight cushion there, but yeah, they need a couple of more consistent points finishes for both cars.
It'll come.
To go on.
These tracks recently haven't really been suited to the McLaren. Moving forward in the next couple of races, it should be more suited to the McLaren, to the drivers and to the car. So hopefully we'll see them maintain P3. Like if they finish the season on third, especially with how competitive that Racing Point was at the beginning of the year and all the controversy around that it was last year's Mercedes and how strong it was going to be. If McLaren managed to finish in third, that is a fantastic result for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. Yeah, they should be very happy with how it's gone so far. I think one of my friends who's not a Formula One fan, but it does me the courtesy of indulging me by asking me about Formula One every now and again. They asked me what my predictions were for McLaren, and I think I said that I'd be happy if they were sort of regularly in the top 10 in racing.
They've
And of course,
achieved
we've
that.
seen 2 podiums.
Yeah,
You know,
but
I hoped that they might get a podium, but we've had 2 podiums so far, and yeah, so they definitely should be happy. Racing Point have been a little bit disappointing in places. They've maybe not had the consistency they were hoping for. They've not quite scared. I think their car was quite scary at first because they were a bit of an unknown quantity, and there was a sense that
yeah,
they might suddenly rush to the top of the midfield to such an extent that they were going to start challenging Red Bull and maybe even the Mercedes itself, and it hasn't quite
yeah,
happened.
it hasn't happened, has it, at all?
No.
Um,
Williams also still waiting for their first point. We've already said how we hope that happens very soon.
yeah, or at least by the end of the year. I don't care how soon
Yeah.
it is. If it could be the last race, it'll be the last race. But
Yeah.
I just don't want to see Williams
Any
finish at
points.
the bottom of the grid again. Let Haas do that. But it's strange, isn't it? Like you look at the bottom 3 teams: Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams. There's only 4 points Alfa Romeo. If Williams managed to have a two decent races, they're going to finish 7th, or no, they'll finish 8th in the championship, and that's a tremendous amount of money compared to finishing 10th in the championship. Like it's all to play
Mhm.
for, and I'm sure they know that. But we're talking like tens of millions of pounds difference at
Yeah.
the bottom end of the grid compared to finishing 9th or 7th. It all counts, and I really hope, especially if Haas with only 1 point, like that's not good for them. Like they're in exactly the same boat as Williams, but if they can just get that Williams car in the points, I'm passionate.
And if it's any consolation to Russell and Williams fans, Russell isn't last in the Drivers' Championship. He's 20th out of 21.
Mm.
So obviously 21 because we have Hulkenberg.
Hulkenberg is currently sat on 6
gets
points.
gets to be on the standings, even though obviously not being a full-time driver. So
Yeah, Hulkenberg is currently 15th out of 21 drivers this year. Great finishing. He and that was over 2 races, and he participated in 1. So, yeah, not too bad. And I guess Grosjean, Russell, and Latifi obviously all scored 0 points, but that's in reverse order. What is that? Just through finishing position or
yeah,
qualifying position?
it'll always consider finishing position even if you
Okay.
don't score points.
Fair enough. So that's is
Because
what it
somebody
is.
has to be ahead of somebody, so they just do it based on that.
Fair enough. Right, guys, that finishes off our post-race review for the second Italian Grand Prix of the year. Thank you very much for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a comment on any thoughts you have. If you're listening to us on your podcast app, please give us a thumbs up or a rating. It's greatly appreciated. We get notified every time it comes through, and it gives me a little bit of a buzz. If you want to get in contact with us, you can do through email at info@raceperminute.com. You can either send us an email through typing, or maybe send us a video message, and we'll play that back in the next podcast or 1 or 2 after that once we receive it. You can also get in contact with us by following us on Twitter at RacePerMinute. Both Alex and I have access to that Twitter account, so we'll be responding to your direct messages and tweets as they come in. We've enjoyed talking to you guys this weekend through the Italian Grand Prix. I've been away, but Alex is taking control of the Twitter account, and yeah, like to see the interaction going on. It's really warming. It's really warming to see people like talk about a sport we're so passionate about. And just to finally summarize, if you would like to support us on Patreon, you can do by visiting patreon.com/raceperminute. So thank you very much.
Everything.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you in the next one.
See you soon. Thanks very much.